Okay, I am obsessed with my kids' pajamas, which is why I was really excited to find Sleepy Drew, a family-owned small business where comfort meets styles for moms and their little ones. Their adorable pajamas come in 2-piece sets or zip-ups, and they're cozy, durable, and even have antibacterial properties. Designed by a mom with moms in mind, Sleepy Drew brings warmth and joy to your family's sleep routine. Visit sleepydrew.com and you can receive a 15% discount on your first order by using the code QUIETCONNECTION, all one word, at checkout. Shop now and make bedtime the best time with Sleepy Drew. Welcome to Quiet Connection, a podcast dedicated to ending the stigma around postpartum mental health. I'm Chelsea. This week, I'm connecting with Farrah about her journey as a nurse, childbirth educator, and advocate for maternal and child health. Farrah shares her experiences in the healthcare system, her passion for serving vulnerable families, and the transformative power of birth story medicine. We discuss the importance of storytelling in healing, the role of trauma-informed care, and the need for advocacy in improving birth outcomes. Here's Farrah. Hello! Today I'm here with Farrah. Farrah, how are you?
I'm doing really well and so excited to be here with you, Chelsea.
I am so excited to have you. Yeah, Farrah and I have been working as part of a team, I guess, in Vermont. It's called VCHIP, and I always forget what the acronym stands for, but I'll figure that out.
Child health. I'm not
improvement.
Yeah.
Child health improvement program. Yeah. But Farrah does so much more than that. And I could list all of the things that I have on my little bullet point thing. But rather than doing that, I would love it if you could sort of introduce yourself, what you do. And I'd also love to know about who you were before you were a parent.
That's such a good question. I love that. So, yeah, my name's Farrah. Some people say Farrah or Farah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
No,
is it Farrah?
It's in most people in the United States say Farrah, and I love all the pronunciations. So I just like to let people know, like, there's so many ways to say it. It's one of the things I love about my name. It means happiness and joy. So the reason why I'm starting out by answering that way is because I think it speaks to a lot about who I was before I was a parent, just this person who really wanted, came into the world, I guess, wanting and feeling and experiencing joy in my name and my being, and also like having that be part of my purpose and my mission, not really knowing that obviously as a little person, but definitely feeling into that, as I got older, even before kids. So, but I'm a nurse. I'm a registered nurse. I have my master's in health systems leadership, and I've always worked in the perinatal and maternal child health realm in one way or another. So school nursing, mamas and babies, families, home visiting. I've worked in hospitals, community centers, a little bit of everything. And I've also done lots of research, and really the main populations that I have tended to be really committed to and focused on in my career are families that maybe in one way or another haven't been tended to as well as we would like them to be in the healthcare system. So whether that's families struggling with substance use, families that have had trauma, families whose children have been separated from them for one reason or another, either, medically or because of social services and, crises in their home, kind of all the most fragile, people in our populations are the ones that I'm really called to serve. So, so that eventually led me to become a childbirth educator in addition to being a registered nurse through Birthing from Within, which is an international, actually, childbirth preparation program. And that was about 18 years ago, sometime after I had my kid. And start to lose track of time at this point. And then that led into the work that you're going to talk a little bit more about today, probably, which is the birth story medicine work, and really specifically helping families recover from difficult or traumatic birth experiences. And not just families, but professionals too, doulas, nurses, OBs, midwives, really anyone who's involved with birth. It can be, as we both know, lots of things can come up that are really difficult or even traumatic. So, yeah, so my work has, I suppose, like many people in many different professions, we refine ourselves and the focus of our work over time, over decades. And so that's kind of the trajectory, that it's taken for me. And so that's that first question. Who I was before I was a mom.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I kind of actually tell people most of the time that I don't really remember a time when I wasn't a mom, because even before I had my own kiddos, I was one of those kiddos that was very maternal,
Mm-hmm.
and protective and nurturing others around me and taking care of little babies in my family, whether it was cousins or siblings or, whoever. I had 2 car seats in my car when I was 16 years old because, I was always tending to somebody's kid.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So before I was a mom, I was a mom, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a big part of my identity. Yeah, and I was, always knew I was going to be a nurse. Always knew I was going to take care of mommies and babies. So it's definitely pretty foundational to, to my being, to my calling.
So much of that like resonates with me, not in terms of career path, because I took a very different career path, but like the always sort of mothering someone. And I
Mhm.
don't know, like I'm an oldest child, oldest
Mhm.
grandchild, like so all of the littles were my responsibility. Not my responsibility, but I felt like they were.
Yeah, you
Um
tended to
so
them.
I absolutely did.
Mhm.
So I can 100% understand that. Even with that said, though, and this is just like a personal question, did you always want to be a mother to your own children? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always knew I wanted to be a mother and a nurse and a writer. Those are the
Mm,
things. I mean, I don't remember a time when I didn't want to do those things. I even have
yeah.
little books when I was like 5, 6 years old where I wrote about wanting to be a writer and a nurse and a mother.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah. So I always knew that I was going to be a mom, and it was definitely a deep calling, maybe
Yeah.
even a this life calling, depending on,
Yeah. I was
um,
gonna say that. Like you understood from a very, very young age, like what you were put here to do.
yeah, I think that I did. That's a really accurate statement, Chelsea. And not to say that I don't, you know, struggle like some other people might with trying to figure that out as I go. I still have some questions, especially at this stage. I'll be 50 this year. So there's a lot of deep, curiosity and sort of exploration now about my purpose, even though it's not necessarily going to change like globally, but again, refining it and really like where
Mm-hmm.
the energy needs to be. And the writer in me is starting to like knock at that door and be like, come on, your turn. Come on
It's
out.
time.
You can be a nurse and a writer and a mother. So she's been exploring and sort of, pushing the edges and stuff a bit over the last, 5 years or so. But those were definitely seated in me,
Yeah.
probably from birth. All those
Yeah.
callings that we have. Yeah.
It's interesting too. Yeah, it's super interesting. Like the first time I met you was during a birth story medicine session, and instantly, like just upon meeting you, like my demeanor softened, and I
Mm-hmm.
kind of went into it prepping for like, and we'll talk so much about like what this is and what this means, but
Mm-hmm.
like I went into our time together with my walls up in
Mm-hmm.
self-preservation mode, like, okay, we're going to talk about trauma and we're going to talk about things that are uncomfortable and I need to prepare for that. And literally within like minutes I was like, okay, this is safe, this is okay.
Wow.
um so you definitely have that. You exude that caretaker, that safe space, what we view as maternal, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. So yeah, just to
Well, thank you.
throw
That's
that out.
I
Yeah.
don't often get to talk with people after, and get the reflection on a session like that.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to I'm excited to talk about it, and I'm sort of like excited to like lift the veil, especially like on my session. Obviously, this isn't like with like confidentiality and whatnot, like we can't talk about other people's sessions and things like
Yeah,
that unless it's in a
totally.
broad sense, but I'm
Yeah.
100% comfortable talking about what we did. But before we even do that, we should talk about what birth story medicine is and
Yeah.
how you found that as something that you were called to.
Great. Great question. Yeah. So birth story medicine is a map, actually, of a way of telling and listening to a story. The medicine part is the person who's listening to the story. They're called a birth story listener. So they're really listening to somebody's story in a really specific way with a map that helps to ideally facilitate healing, right? And facilitate self awareness, personal growth sometimes, can come from that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's a very intentional way of listening to a story. It was developed over, I would say, decades, really, by Pam England, who was the original developer of birth story of, birthing from within, the childbirth
Mm-hmm.
education model. And she was a certified nurse midwife in New Mexico doing home births for many years. Eventually, really pivoted to doing more of this, the childbirth education, piece, and developing this model, and then eventually went on to really work with the families that were coming back to her with difficult births and traumatic birth experiences, and working with them and developing this over years. It's a nice blend of what she calls the ancient, like an ancient map for modern birth. And actually, in one of her books, where, she's really taking some, already existing, I would say, like foundational elements of, psychology, understanding trauma, understanding adult learning, but also really narrative medicine, which is the idea that telling our story can be and is actually probably the most healing human experience we can have, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
even when we can't heal physically from things, if you've ever worked with people like at the end of life, a lot of times people say, like, even if they can't heal, right? Like, even if they can't be cured, telling their story and really having someone validate them and love them and listen to them can be the most healing thing that someone can experience on that more like deeper spiritual love, feeling connected kind of level. And so
Yeah.
that's really where this comes from, is that place. And there are some assumptions, to the work, which is that people have what they need in them actually to have awareness and to heal, that the birth story listener is really the one who's kind of being curious and who's asking
Mm.
questions. When I do trainings with healthcare professionals, I often say it's kind of like going on a geocaching adventure. Have you ever gone on a
Oh,
geocaching
yeah. I
where you
haven't
like,
done it, but I know what it is. Yeah.
yeah, it's like you're finding little clues, and then, you eventually you come to some kind of prize or whatever. But you're the one sort of on the hunt. You're like, as the listener, like, you're curious and seeking and wondering, and you just kind of keep weaving, those threads back and forth until a new tapestry is made, really, of the story. And so it's a more complete story. Maybe it's a story that has more nuances in it than what originally came, or maybe something that had been forgotten, or something that had been remembered, literally, like remembered meaning put back together, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it's very different than the medical birth story, right? Which is like, at 6 o'clock, my water broke, and at noon, I went to the hospital, and at 3, I got my epidural. And it's very different than that story. It's very different than the social story, which can be the story that we tell when we're in groups of other parents, because we're either comparing with each other, or we are trying to not make people feel bad, or we want somebody to be really ready, so we tell them all the worst things,
Yes.
um, there's all kinds of different social stories, and we have different reasons for telling them. But this is a really, I hate to use the word like therapeutic or healing because sometimes those words can be like overused and lose their meaning. But it's intentional. I like that word. It's
Mm-hmm.
intentional. That describes it. It's hard, when you're the one in it all the time to like really describe it to people that that have never experienced it. So,
Well, yeah, and I think that is a great explanation. Hearing you say that, like, I am not a trained mental health professional, I'm not a nurse, I am not trained in birth story medicine or anything like that. But what the mission of this podcast is
mhm,
to give space to people for them to share that story with
mhm,
completely like that you will not get an opinion from me, you will not get any
mhm,
sort of solution from me. It is simply space for you to tell your story.
mhm,
And we'll get into this more later, but like after my session with you, there were things that I noticed I was already doing, and then there were things that I noticed that I started to shift in the way that I was doing
mhm,
my sessions with people. So
mhm,
again, like speaking to the things that you said, like there's a map and you're like geocaching and you're finding these things. The things that I remember most specifically from our session together
mhm,
was one, it did not go in the direction that I thought it was going to go in.
mhm,
I anticipated it being one thing and it was absolutely not that thing. When you say um like putting things together, there were feelings and emotions and circumstances that I hadn't attributed to my birth story
mhm,
that then made perfect sense.
mhm,
And then also you had, and I still do this, like when I was really struggling to find, we were trying to get me on my path. Like when you
mhm.
talk about the math, we were map, not math, map. We were trying to get me on my path and stick to sort of one route. And you told me, like, okay, you've got this necklace and it's full of beads, and
Mm,
all of those beads are a piece of your story. What's the biggest, stickiest, chunkiest bead that's like digging into your skin?
mm.
And I picked it and it wasn't what I thought it would be. And then we explored that. Yeah,
I
like
just
those
love
are
that. I just love that. I just want to pause and just tell
yeah.
you, like, it's such a, I mean, I love that so much. Just everything that you described about it is what it is. It's surprising. Everyone is always like, wow, I didn't know that that was what was going to come. And that's the magic of it. I do like to say that there is magic in birth story medicine. And the more both participants, because the story listener is, although leading in some ways, is still very much a participant, right? The more both participants believe in the magic and can be in the magic together, like the more magic that can happen. So that you allowed that to happen was a big piece of your aha moments, that you have,
Yeah.
right? Is like trusting that you actually have stuff in you that had messages for you, that had information for you, that helped things to make sense and click for you,
Mm-hmm.
but it requires that other person to be in that not knowing, to be that curious
Mm-hmm.
one, right? And to not try to fix it, to
Mm-hmm.
not try to solve it, like you said, to not shame it, of course, or like all those other things that we tend to do. Um,
Yeah.
oh, I just love that. I love your description of the bead.
Well, that was your
I
description. It
I
was
know.
you.
I mean, that's one of the metaphors, to be fair. Like, I didn't, it's a common metaphor that many of us who are
Yeah.
using birth story medicine, there's quite a few that we can use to draw on from that first, moment. But I love that one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
to just like imagine any story. It doesn't have to be a birth story. It could be the story of our child's, you know, our whole child's life could be a necklace even, right? And all those little
Mm-hmm.
moments of their life are, and like which are the ones that stand out, and which are the ones that are, do we really want to tell the story about? I mean, you can use that metaphor for so many things.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
I think it's important to note when again, so like I said, like we connected through VChip, and
Yeah.
I didn't fully understand initially
Yeah.
what they didn't really say, like, hey, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. They were just like, oh, we're going to set you up with this. So schedule. And I was like, okay, cool.
You're like,
Yeah, I was so again, like I was like, okay, this is something. And now I kind of have a better understanding, I think, of like we being those of us who are coming to this with lived experience and coming so what VChip is trying to do is educate people in the medical field and people who are dealing with birthing people and postpartum people for more trauma-informed care and better birth outcomes and
yeah,
postpartum outcomes. And so us, the birthing people, we're coming at it as with our lived experience.
exactly.
And so I viewed our time together as sort of like, okay, we need to kind of tap into that first and explore it a little more first before we can get into any of the advocacy work and the and the policy change and this, that, and the other thing.
Exactly.
So
At least that's my
yeah,
belief. You know, I
yeah,
feel pretty strongly about that. So just to give a little bit of a more global kind of perspective on what's happening in perinatal quality improvement, sort of nationally, I guess, is,
yeah.
you know, every state has something called a PQC, a perinatal quality collaborative, or some type of a perinatal quality organization. And in New England, we had the Northern New England Perinatal Quality Improvement Network, which was all 3 states for a while because we were so tiny, up here compared to
Yeah.
other states, right? So over the past, however many years, 3, 4, 5 years, each of the states now are developing their own, which is important because every state also has its own unique issues that need to be addressed. And ultimately, quality improvement does happen on the big scale, but it's also very community based. We know that
Mm-hmm.
when communities are really tending to their birthing families uniquely based on what's going on in that community, that's when you're going to have better outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have to have trainings and education and make sure that, obstetricians and midwives are like following certain protocols about postpartum hemorrhage and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately also in those communities, we have to support families in the way that they need. And so in New Hampshire, the quality collaboratives are also sort of doing this like hub and spoke model where the communities are having coalitions. In Vermont, what they've been focusing on initially is through VChip is this the parent advisory group that you're a part of, and there's about a dozen parents on to really get those voices into the mix, because for decades we haven't been doing that very well in healthcare in
No.
general, especially when it comes to families and pregnant people and birthing people. So that's been a focus in Vermont. And so I've been doing some work, around New England for lots of years. And like you said, trauma-informed care and just quality work in general. And so Vermont VChip had reached out and said, hey, we know that you're doing this birth story medicine work. We want our families to be really well prepared to do this advocacy work. And a couple of the folks at VChip and myself had been at conferences together where we had seen it not go so well, with parents telling their stories and it just not landing in the best way possible. And, and that's not a dig. It was just more like, okay, this is all new. This is all new.
Yeah.
Like having parents and families be a part of this process is so new. We're like at the fledgling stage. And so it's really exciting actually to be kind of, to be a person who's asking like, how can we do this in the best way possible, both for families and for healthcare professionals so that they can get the information they need and also make the behavior changes, which is actually what we want, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how this program was birthed, was basically like, how are we going to make sure that families are ready, like you said, to do that advocacy work? And exactly what you said is my belief, my dream, my vision is that each individual person first has their own process of telling their story, of having their story heard, whether that's birth story medicine or some other way.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I'm pretty committed to the birth story medicine process because I've seen it work hundreds of times over the past 10 years. Um, but, you know, just, yeah, assuring that people at least have that connection and that, you know, foundation before they jump into the QI project or the advocacy work or telling their story or speaking at a conference or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
so glad that that's something that Vermont was like, yeah, let's do it. You know, I'm saying Vermont, you know, the people at VJIP, you know, who,
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Yeah, no, I was thankful. I was thankful for it. And I remember leaving the session. First of all, like I cried and I hadn't cried in
mm,
months. Um, I cried and I remember being like, I need more of this. Like I
mhm,
talked to my personal therapist afterwards and I explained what we did and
mhm,
I'll get into it a little bit more. But essentially, like the things that we talked about and the things that we uncovered, I talked to my personal therapist and I was like, hey, we've got some things that we need to work on.
yeah, dive into
Because, yeah, because I was like, because a lot of these things came up that I did not realize were impacting my experience of what has happened to me in the last 2 years.
it. Mhm.
So,
Can I ask you a question about that?
yeah, please.
So, was it ultimately impacting your experience and your belief about yourself as a parent?
What we talked about.
Yeah, like the thread of what happened in your birth and kind of the stuff that you were uncovering. Like, do you feel like the impact was on, you know, around your
I
parenting, or what was it impacting
It
that
was
you
definitely
hadn't been aware
it was impacting my view of myself. Maybe not necessarily as a parent,
of? Hmm.
um but my view of myself and how, like, without being cryptic, like I I still will say I still am, much less now, but like when we talk about like stages of grief,
Hmm.
I'm definitely still in anger and I'm 2.5 years postpartum from my youngest.
Hmm.
Um
I remember that
and
now. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
so I there's a lot of anger there. There's a lot less now, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of anger there and I didn't know where to direct it and I didn't know where it was coming from.
Hmm.
And when we spoke, when we talked, we uncovered two things that had never occurred to me before. And they weren't necessarily directed towards my parenting. They were very, very personal to me. One of them was my fear of becoming my grandparent. Um, so I have addiction in my family, like deep rooted addiction and alcoholism in my family. And because of my PMADs and because of my experience, I was put on medications that made me very, very nervous.
Hmm.
And I had a lot of anger around that, but I didn't know why. And I didn't, right. And so
Nervous that you were going to go on that trajectory.
I
Yeah.
realized that I was like, I don't want to be an addict. I don't want to, and I'm not. And I'm like, nothing points in that direction. But
Hmm.
we kept picking at that thread. And even beyond that, beyond saying like, you don't want to become your grandmother or your whoever, your grandparent, it was disappointing my younger self. And
Mm-hmm.
we started talking about my inner child. I had never done inner child work at all,
Hmm.
but it clicked instantly that there
Hmm.
was this little me inside of me being like, no, 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 no. You fought so hard and you put up these walls and you protected yourself because you did not want that for yourself.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And
I have like the jitters, you know, like my body's like, yeah, that's just
yeah,
so
but
resonating.
that had never
Yeah.
occurred to me.
Yeah.
Never occurred to me.
Yeah.
And as soon
Yeah.
as we got there, I think is when I started crying because I was like, this makes so much sense. And it seems so far removed from my birth story, but it's not.
Hmm.
Um,
Isn't that
and we
beautiful
don't,
and amazing?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so
It's
amazing.
there, it's so complex and there's so
It
much
is.
more to it.
Yeah.
And, but in terms of in terms of the trauma that I went through
Mhm.
and kind of continue to go through just with my my current
Mhm.
circumstances,
Mhm.
because I also grew up experiencing constant chaos and trauma, there's a little version of me inside myself that's just trying to protect me.
Yeah.
And it's coming out as anger at
Mhm.
me.
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Yep.
so, yeah. So, like, I left our session and I was crying, and I immediately texted my therapist and I was like, okay, we need to do some inner child work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we need to work on guilt and shame.
So you touched something so deep. You touched something that had been banished or, locked away so long ago. And, that little part of you, that little girl in you, right? That just really was so determined to protect yourself
Yeah.
and not become the thing that had probably been scary to you or that had hurt you or that you didn't want, to be that to other people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we all, and this is where sometimes and so I'm not a licensed clinical mental health counselor. And I always, share that up front. Like I'm a registered
Mm-hmm.
nurse. My expert is in birth. My expert is in, perinatal. I also do have a lot of education in perinatal mental health. I'm going to sit for my PMHC exam in another month or so here, finally. A dozen years overdue, but, you know, I do, I've done lots of learning, right, in that field.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as nurses, there's always so much overlap, but I do like to say like, okay, I don't actually do psych, technically.
Yeah. Yep.
But sometimes our psych work is important. Our counseling is important, but it's really different than this. It's really different than birth story medicine. And so I often say to people, like, it's not one or the other. You're not like choosing this or that. It's so complementary. So for people that are already like you were experiencing counseling and had a relationship with a mental health, professional, sometimes having one or two or three birth story medicine sessions can be so impactful to that work because you can keep going and, like you said, uncovering, those threads. And for some people, it's actually what sets them off on that journey. They come for a birth story medicine session and they're like, wow, I didn't realize that I was carrying this thing for the last, 20, 30 years, that actually showed up in my birth, and that's showing up in my parenting, or that's showing up in my self-efficacy, just what I think about
Yeah.
myself. So it can be so complementary,
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't, because some people will come to me and they'll say, well, should I do counseling or should I do birth story medicine? I'm like, well, it's, they're really different. They're really different.
Yeah.
They're looking at different things in a way. Yeah. I'm so glad you had that, Chelsea, to keep going.
I think, well, so I always say, like, we don't pitch, we don't convert, none. This isn't a space for
Yeah. Yeah.
anything like that. The only thing that I will always say is, one, if you're struggling, either reach out to your PCP or find a mental health professional,
Yep.
because those are tried and true. And yeah, and if counseling is not for you, counseling is not for you.
Exactly. And sometimes people just need a really good doula who's listening to them, or
Oh,
sometimes their
yes.
IBCLC lactation consultant is the one who hears their birth story and they get some clarity, So yeah, to your point, it's more about what's working for each person and help,
Yep.
having that person be really deeply held, in their story. And oftentimes we need more than one thing, right? Or one person,
Mm-hmm.
just like with mental health, we sometimes need more than one medicine, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, I think that speaks to like the state of the state in perinatal health in general is we need all of these supports and safety nets. And what helps people heal and feel better and be the best parents they can be is when all those nets are like, interwoven and, sort of catching them and helping them, move along. So it sounds like you had a really, good support when you were
Yeah.
covering your story in a different way.
And I
It's
continue to
gives me the
have that support network.
shivers knowing it's just like, wow, like like when you get the chills when something is just
Yes.
like so, um, you connecting with your, yeah, little girl Chelsea.
Yeah, and we talked about that too, which
Yeah.
we barely got to talk about because I identify as non-binary, but I see little me as she.
Okay.
as this
Okay.
little girl. Well, you acknowledged that as well. We did, because I remember I told you my pronouns, but then anytime I was referring to little me, I called her her.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, that's its own thing. But like, yeah, it was this little
Little person.
girl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, no, she was a little girl. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I was me, but I think it's just because I was never raised to understand anything else or to know
Yeah.
that there were any other options. So when I visualize little me, it's a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it ties around again to another thing that we talk about is support networks.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you brought up doulas. We've been talking so much about doulas. We have talked to doulas, and we have one of the recurring themes is people talking about like, get a doula.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people don't even realize that that's an option. And there are barriers to that. There are
Mm-hmm.
financial barriers
Mm-hmm.
to getting a doula. There are socioeconomic
Mm-hmm.
barriers to getting a doula. There are cultural stigmas. But I think at least exploring that outlet, like a doula really is there to empower you and to listen to you and to advocate for you when you may not be able to advocate for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you brought up the doula.
Yeah. Yeah. And support people in general, and making, and yeah, just assuring that they're the ones that align for you, and letting your intuition, be your guide too. And like, does this feel like it's a right relationship for me? Does this resonate with me? And
Yeah.
thankfully, as far as the affordability of doulas go, I'm not sure if you're aware if it's been talked about on your podcast yet, Chelsea, but um, New Hampshire passed omnibus legislation recently that does pay for, it's legislation that mandates that Medicaid pay for doula services, and
Mm-hmm.
that Medicaid also pay for in-home lactation, services, so that
Mm-hmm.
lactation professionals who are working independently can care for families in their homes, among other things, the bill did. But so states are starting to do that, and
Mm-hmm.
generally what happens is private insurers will follow suit. This is, it's taking some time. Of course, I mean, many of us in this field have been working on these initiatives for decades, and now
Yeah.
we're finally seeing the fruits of our labor. But so I guess, that's just to say, like, hang in there, and also kind of check and see what the funding situation is in your, in your state, in your community. And always check with your insurer to see, even if it's not a known benefit, sometimes reimbursement can happen. So just put a plug in
Yeah.
for people to get their needs met there as much as possible.
Well, and like, so we're speaking to the future right now,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
which they say don't do that on a podcast, but I don't know how you can avoid it. Um, Speaking to the future right now, and without getting political, I don't know where we're going to be when this episode airs. I don't know what the
Yeah.
state of our medical system is going to look like. I don't know what the state of our women's rights are going to look like. But so with that said, again, I say I don't give advice, but this isn't so much advice. It's reiterating, start building your village now.
Yeah.
If you have children, if you're thinking about having children, build your village now. And it's, again, finding the people that resonate with you and that support you and will support you if you can't
Mm-hmm.
advocate for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And
so
if I could add something to that with, kind of weaving in the perinatal mental health piece, is if you are a young parent, or you're, getting ready to birth, or thinking about having children, or I don't mean young parent, I mean a parent of young children.
yeah, yeah.
um, because we can be all kinds of ages when we have young children, but or even grandparents with young children for that matter. Be also like, try to attend to that place in you that is in the season of receiving.
Mm-hmm.
And, this again weaves into counseling and birth story medicine and having a doula and all that. But also, like, I just, I've been working with quite a few families lately who the birthing person has been severely struggling with mental health. Seems like there's just been an uptick with psychosis and other, like,
Yeah.
really severe lately. And one of the things that all the families are struggling with that I'm working with is receiving the help, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
being able to ask for it and then receive it, accept it. And I like to say that when you're in this stage of life, you're in a season of receiving. You are, think of yourself as a newborn mother or a newborn parent or a newborn
Yeah.
father, and newborn babies need tending to. And so do newborn parents. They need a lot of tending. They need a lot of rest, actually. They need a lot of nurturing. They
Mm-hmm.
need a lot of good nutrition. They need all
Yes.
these things to sustain themselves. And the rest of the world wants to give to new families. I know that from a societal, political perspective, we don't do a good job with that. But if we go down to the individual level, there are so many people who want to bring meals to families, who want to, help take care of children, who want to, be a listening ear, and our culture hasn't done a good job at connecting those people to the families that need it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they're there. They're there. They're definitely there. So, yeah, so be in a place of receiving and kind of reach out. And, if you have a church, if you have a group that you're involved in, like you said,
Yep.
build your village and be okay with, having meals brought to your doorstep for the first couple
Yeah.
weeks your baby's born. Like starting, have your sister or your mother-in-law or, your friend do a little meal train or, I forget all the names of those calendar,
Oh my gosh. There's so many
organizational
different
things
things you
online,
can
but
do.
like you can, yeah. So be in that place. I think that
Yeah.
that can help the mental health side of things. People can feel better and heal when they're tended to and nurtured. So,
And I think for a lot of people it's difficult because you get, again, like you said, like culturally for us,
mhm,
like we're supposed to not ask for help. We're
mhm,
supposed to, there's this whole bounce back culture. Yeah, and be independent and get on with things and this, that, and the
mhm,
other thing. But
mhm.
being able to receive and to seek the
Yep.
support, and that's when why I say like build your village. Like you have to, some people have it and that's great, but
Yep.
sometimes you have to actively seek it out.
Yep. Yep.
um, but
You
yeah,
do.
there's a rabbit hole.
There is. For most of human history, this was all stuff that was just embedded into our world, and it's just not now.
Hmm.
So, like, it sucks actually that we have to work so hard as mothers and parents to make it happen. But yeah, if you invest a little bit those first few years, then it really does help. Yeah.
Yeah, this is another rabbit hole, and then I promise we'll get back on track.
Yeah.
But
No.
something that sparked curiosity in me is, and I agree with you, we're seeing and hearing more about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and we're seeing more about postpartum psychosis.
Hmm.
And I'm not seeking an answer necessarily, but I'm curious if that is a result of us talking about it more,
Hmm.
and it being more visible, and
Hmm.
so more people are feeling safe in coming forward.
Hmm.
um because we say 1 in 5, we like, that's the, we all know the statistic 1 in 5, but
Hmm.
we also know that I think like 80% of birthing people go undiagnosed,
Hmm.
for so many reasons. And it's just a curiosity in my head, like maybe the fact that we're talking about this more is allowing people to feel safe coming forward and asking
Hmm.
for help. And so that may be why we're seeing an uptick. I don't, it also is the pandemic, and it's also the state of the world, and it's also like
Yeah, I think you're right.
everything.
I think it's a combination, Chelsea. I think that, like with any diagnosis, the more awareness we have about it, the more we're going to see people being diagnosed with it because, it happened with celiac disease, something that's
Oh
very
yeah.
physical, right? Like when there started to be more awareness about it about 2 decades ago, there was more diagnosis. And then there was a little bit of an uptick in the United States of diagnosis. It's not because those people didn't have
Didn't
celiac
have it.
before. It's because more doctors were actually looking for it when people had symptoms. So this actually happens with all diagnoses, like whether it's physical, the more we have awareness about it and research, the more we see it. But I think there also is a rise. I think both is happening.
Yeah.
Um, like you said, the state of the state, the complexity of people who are birthing today, we're older. We tend to have
Yep.
more other health, conditions when we're birthing in the United States. We have, a rise in people not having, not giving birth in their initial and their like family of origin space, right? So like people are moving, they're not in, like you said, they don't have that village automatically with extended family. And so over the last few decades, we've seen a shift with that, right? So there's a combination of reasons why. And I also think one thing that's happening with mental health is that so much of birth, and we talked about this a little bit even in your experience, right, is shocking. It
Mm-hmm.
becoming a parent there's grief involved. You're losing a sense of who you were. You actually are losing yourself. You're not ever going to be the Chelsea that you were before you had children.
Mm-hmm.
And there is grief that comes with that. There is a sense of loss. There is even some anxiety because you're trying to identify who you are now as a person. Like you said, who was I before I was a mother?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I was a mother, but there were other things about me that, that were lost that I couldn't be anymore. And sometimes those are things like just having personal freedom to go to the store without children. It
Yes.
can be like intimacy with your partner. It can be relationships with our mothers change, with our sisters change, with our friends change. Our relationship with our body changes. I mean, so many women go through such physical trauma, right? So you have
Mm-hmm.
loss of your body image. So I think what's not happening around, and I don't know if you've talked about this in any of your podcasts. I haven't listened to all of them. I listened to a few. So maybe you have.
That's okay.
But I think what's part of what's happening is that there is a normal, appropriate, experience of grief and loss and anxiety that comes with this change in identity that we haven't really figured out, and we're not doing a good job at naming, at helping people to anticipate, and at helping people to navigate. And so I'm not saying that we don't have postpartum depression and anxiety. And so of course we do. But I think that part of that is actually the normal occurrence of a stage of transformation in someone's life that isn't fully understood, that isn't fully
Mm-hmm.
named, that we don't have a place to go like, okay, this is what's happening. I'm having an identity crisis in part because I'm becoming a mother, and I need somebody to help me with a map for that. I need a map.
Yes.
I need a map for this. I need to know that this is actually part of the trajectory of becoming a parent or a mother or a father. So I think that the not having that leads to then a longer term depression or anxiety, and
Yeah.
for some people.
It's
Obviously there's other elements of it, but I think if we were doing a better job at that, we could mitigate, some of what's going on. So,
it's so interesting that you say that. I literally was just talking to a guest yesterday
mm,
who is a mental health professional and who did she flipped that script for me, and we talked about how sometimes PMADs are not the cause but the result.
right.
So
Perfect.
right. And
Yep.
sometimes they are the cause, but for a lot of people, and for her, she was talking about how like it was a result for her because no one told her it was going to be this way. It like it's
Yeah.
like the song from Friends. No
Right.
one told you life was going to be this way. um but and so she was like, I like postpartum depression. I just kept being like, no, this is just really hard. And I'm
Right.
depressed and I'm hopeless because this is hard. And no one is saying, like, yeah, you're right. This is really hard or this
Mm-hmm.
is really difficult. So it's so interesting. It's
Mm-hmm.
so, and I had never thought about it that way
Mm-hmm.
before.
Or
But
being curious and saying which part of you actually is grieving, which
yes.
part of you is lost, which part of you is begging to be seen and heard and tended to. And oftentimes it goes back to that, right? That little
Yeah.
person who was so surprised or who was so determined that they would be this kind of mother
Mm-hmm.
or that kind of mother, or that they would have a natural birth. I mean, most of the time, people who are giving birth have determined what their beliefs and what they want for birth in their psyche
Yeah.
long before they're pregnant. I mean, I'm talking
Yep.
decades. Those kind of choices are made when we are 6, 7, 8, 9 years old
Hmm.
because we see somebody give birth or we hear about a story or, we're told something and we determine at that time based on that little person just with that limited amount of information because that's what little people do. Like we
Yeah.
don't have any other choice. How to make sense of the world is just to take in, but then we solidify that and that's who we bring into birth, and if we don't do some of that work prenatally, which in our culture we're not really offering that type of childbirth education, right?
Hmm.
Then it's that little person who's showing up in birth and that little person who's traumatized and that little person who's shocked and grieving and not able to access their big person resources, in birth.
Yeah.
And then they're the one also trying to recover. And so no wonder why we end up with, postpartum depression and stuff. I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes any sense, but
Oh, yeah.
we can use the word archetypes, like some of your listeners might be familiar with that concept, but it's a Jungian concept essentially of like that there's different parts in us. There's also people like Dick Schwartz who does parts work. Some of your listeners might be familiar with family systems therapy. So
Okay.
it's called. And it's essentially it's that idea that we all have these parts in us, these ones, like the one that you identified.
Yeah.
Um, and when we go into birth, there's lots of those ones, that are showing up, that are at play, and when we're parenting, they're all over the place. All those ones in us who have had different experiences in our life, our adolescent can be in there, our wounded child, some people, will call them. But there's these different ones in us or these different archetypes. And I think that one of the ways that we can really help people to heal from PMADs and birth stories is by helping people to identify, all those different archetypes within them or those parts, depending on, the approach you take. But
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
understanding that conceptually, and birth story medicine, definitely that's a key element for us is really, or for that model is the archetype model, like really,
Hmm.
seeing archetypes, seeing the child, actually listening to the child come through in a session, listening to the mother come through, listening to maybe even the wild woman, the one who wanted to say like, F off, to somebody
Yeah.
in the middle of birth, but then didn't. They held their voice back because they were afraid of how people were going to treat them. And then after the
Hmm.
fact, they're like, I wish I had just said F off.
Yeah.
Um, so that wild one who was like tamed in birth and then who's been tamed, their whole life. And then finally postpartum, they're like, I'm not taming her anymore. Like, so that can happen, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's important to when we're listening to someone's story, no matter who we are, whether we're a doula, mental health, to really be listening for all those different parts of that person who's showing up. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
identify.
And that was definitely made clear to me in my session, honoring
Yeah.
the different parts
Mm-hmm.
of myself. So I love how beautifully, even though we like jumped down some rabbit holes,
Mm-hmm.
we were able to tie all of it back to birth story medicine because the
Mm-hmm.
work that you're doing, I mean, all the work that you're doing is very important, but I'm particularly invested in the work that you're doing with birth story medicine because of, I mean, obviously how much it affected me,
Mm-hmm.
and how much I know that it can be of benefit to others.
Mm-hmm.
And so like we alluded a little bit in the beginning to like how it shifted how I do quiet connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Love that.
yeah, and so and I know you were a little bit curious about that. And I don't think that it's anything like revolutionary, but it is a conscious shift.
Mm-hmm.
So things that I noticed that I was already doing was it's again like coming into the space not as a part, like I'm not a participant in your story necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a character in your story, and I'm not here with an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here as a conduit, and when people come onto my show and they share their stories, like I say, I don't like to learn a lot about their background. I don't like to learn a lot about them because I want to come at it fresh. And I also, like, I have everybody fill out a little Google Doc. It's a super short, it's like really, really minimal.
Mm-hmm.
And what that allows me to do is to make sure that I use our time together in a way that they feel as if they have been heard,
Mm-hmm.
and that they have gotten out, they have shared everything that they want to share.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something I was already doing. But now I have also started shifting into, every guest is different. Some guests talk a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
some guests take a little more prompting.
Mm-hmm.
But rather than trying to steer a conversation, and you can sort of like correct me if this because this is what I took away from it. I listen.
Mm-hmm.
I let each person talk as much or as little as they want, but I'm listening intentionally, and then when I respond, I'm telling them what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not responding in a way that's like, oh yeah, because like when I felt that, or like, oh yeah, when blah blah blah. It's not a comparison thing. It's like, oh, I heard you say
Mm-hmm.
this, and this,
Mm-hmm.
and that, and then I'm sort of asking them to look into it a little bit deeper. So I am walking the path beside them. I'm definitely not guiding. I'm not leading.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a shift that I started making, in that it's just listen to listen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm not here to get a certain type of story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not here to push a certain type of narrative. I
Mm-hmm.
am here for my guests to share as much or as little as they want or need to, and to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that at the end of our time together, they feel seen.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that is pretty much the map. It's listening, reflecting, and curiosity. Repeat.
Yeah.
And we call that in birth story medicine. We also call it this in psychology and counseling. Validation,
Mm-hmm.
empathetic awareness, empathetic listening. We don't use in birth story medicine like the phrase "I heard you," but we will say, "Wow, that was so shocking," or "That must have been so shocking," or like naming, like you said, naming the thing.
Yes.
That you're hearing.
I definitely don't go like, so you said,
Yeah.
but it's the acknowledging of
like
like,
you're naming, you're kind of summarizing,
yes,
right? Like,
yes, yep,
and validating and acknowledging kind of in your own words. But sometimes what happens is when you do that, like somebody will say, wow, yes, exactly. That's how I felt. Because as they're describing it to you, you can kind of hear what they're feeling, even though if they're not saying it. And then sometimes you're the one that actually names it. And they're like, yes,
yeah.
or the tears start, right?
And I've been there,
Like,
and I'm like, oh my gosh,
because that
okay,
means you hit I call it the bullseye, because you
mm-hmm.
can see something shift in their body. You can see their face change. You can actually see them take a breath and expand and relax and
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes cry. And that's how you know that you have heard them and you have named for them what they are experiencing.
Yeah,
And exactly, that's what it is. And then being curious for them to go further, and
yeah,
so it can be tell me more, or so exactly. That's like, and it's so beautiful that that I guess it's so cool that like that is applicable to a podcast, right? Like
yeah.
if we ask someone like, would this be applicable to a podcast? People would be like, no, how's that applicable? But it is, like this type of listening is applicable to any type of storytelling and story sharing and story
Mm-hmm.
listening that we're doing.
Well, I
So
think that's just what humans we crave as humans is to just be heard
Mhm.
and validated. I was
Yeah.
just having this conversation with my husband, and I'm like, well, I don't do anything. He's listening to my episodes, like he's getting caught up. And I was like,
Mhm.
I'm not doing anything like revolutionary here. I'm just listening. I'm
Mhm.
just because people just want to be heard.
Yeah.
So, like,
But in a way it
again,
is, and I think that you should acknowledge that and, like, and own it, you know, really
I
for
know I have a hard time
serious, Chelsea, 'cause
internalizing, like,
it is also revolutionary, you know, in our culture, in our society at this time, to listen to people's stories in this way, you know, is not the norm, at least, you know? And
I
so
hope it will be.
yeah,
I
me
hope it
too.
can be. I hope it
So
can be. But
what has like, yeah, tell me more about what's changed for you, like what you're noticing in both your I'm so curious in both your the people that you're interviewing and also, you know, yourself and your flow and all that. Like what's
Um, so this has been a very reflective, like, time for me in general. And I went back and I was listening to episodes from season 1, and now I'm, like, editing and putting out
Mhm,
episodes from season 4. Season 1, I was I mean, again, I'd never done anything like this before.
mhm,
So, like, I was very rushed. I was very, it was much more, like, interview based,
mhm, mhm,
and I as the seasons progress, like, this is just one aspect, but, like, my cadence changes,
mhm,
my tone of voice has softened,
mhm,
and I'm more me.
mhm,
I'm much more reflective, and I've slowed down. Um, I also the guests that I am having,
mhm,
are very different, and I'm able to do sessions with people from every sort of background
mhm,
or cultural upbringing. Or I have done sessions with people who I and this has absolutely nothing to do with, like, I have no judgment or view on people other than from when we meet each other. I would imagine if we sat down at a booth in a diner, we'd have nothing to talk about. Like, right? Like, on almost every other aspect, we would
mhm,
be very much opposed.
mhm,
Um, but in our time together, that's not there.
mhm,
Um, it's about them, and it's about their story, and it's about their journey, and my thoughts or beliefs don't play into it, and I'm able to connect with them,
mhm,
quiet connection, um,
mhm,
where they're at, and I can empathize and I can validate. So, yeah, in the beginning, it was very much like, I've got to get this off the ground, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I have to be this certain way. And then as it's progressed, I am much more like, I'm here to listen to you.
mhm, mhm,
And whatever you want to tell me or whatever you don't want to tell me, I'm here for it.
mhm,
And thank you for, like, to all of my guests, like, thank you for sharing what you're sharing, because it's gonna hit with someone.
mhm. Yeah.
It's gonna hit, and even if it doesn't, if you feel better at the end,
Mhm,
then it hit with you, and
mhm,
that's great.
mhm.
Um, so I don't know if that answers the question, but, like,
Yeah, yeah, and you've been gradually moving to a place of, couple things I'm noticing is, yeah, some, like, non-attachment, you know, it's like it's kind of like unconditional love, right? It's like
yeah.
doesn't have to actually come with a return. It's just you have some trust and some faith that it's going to be exactly what it needs to be.
Mhm.
And we would call this, I would say, from an archetypal perspective, like you've been moving into maybe like your medicine woman. You know,
Mm.
you're wearing your cloak, you know, and when you step into this space and you sit at your desk and you know, you put on your headphones and it's like you're literally activating this medicine woman in you. And this is your medicine. You know, your
Yeah.
medicine is, you know, asking questions and hearing people's stories and you know, creating something that goes out into the world that's going to land with someone in some particular way. And like you said at the beginning, that you're the conduit for, you know, you're not, you don't necessarily have an agenda of like, this is how it has to land, and it has to land with this many people, or it has to land in
Yeah.
this. And that's exactly what's happening in birth story medicine, is ideally, those of us who are practicing are stepping into that space and that moment. And that's not to say it's not constant work, because it is. It's a lot.
Yeah.
My mother archetype is, as you mentioned, as we talked about, is very powerful, and you felt that in my session, right? Like right from the
Mm-hmm.
get-go. And she's important and she belongs there, but she can be overactive. My mother caretake archetype, I have to check her, because she can try to take over.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's so well developed. I'm not going to judge her. She's not overdeveloped, but she's so well developed in my life that she can sometimes get in the way, actually, of like my medicine woman, really
Yeah.
being the one who, because the mother does have somewhat of an agenda. She wants people to feel better.
Right. You want to fix it.
Yes. And so I have to walk that line between helping, my mother archetype showing up and creating that space and that safety,
Mm-hmm.
but also allowing her to step back so that if somebody's really hurting, she doesn't have to rush in and take care of it. She can just be curious and be in her medicine, really activate the medicine one in me. And that's actually I would say that's a pretty constant dynamic that I'm working with in my own development,
Mm-hmm.
is the interplay between those, because because my mother archetype is she's so autonomic. I have to be like, you girl, you sit down. Like, you're fine. This one does not need a mother right now.
Take
She
a
needs a
break.
medicine woman. Put your medicine woman cloak on,
Yes.
So that's what I'm hearing you describe, is that what's shifted for you is this, like, it's almost an energetic feeling of, you were paid probably a little bit in your adolescent when you first started,
Oh,
even, right?
yeah.
Wanting to get it right, the maiden one in you, right? Who's like trying to like, get things right a little bit. But that's such a normal trajectory though, Chelsea, too,
Yeah.
whenever we're doing anything new, professionally, especially. So that's so cool, just to hear how that has developed for you over these
Yeah.
few years you've been doing this.
It's 2 years.
2 years. Yeah.
Next month.
So that
Yeah.
is like beautiful. And then to be, keep being curious about, wow, what else is going to come, um
Mm-hmm.
so I love that.
Yeah. It's very cool. I am being very clear. I am not a birth story medicine worker. I am not trained in that whatsoever. But I just the impact that it made on me, and that I would just love to see. Well, I would love to see more of it,
Yeah.
obviously, because you're so good at these maps and and walking and getting us to our final destination.
Mhm.
Um, I have my typical questions that I ask at the end of the episode, but I'm not going to use those for this episode. And this may be challenging,
Mhm.
or maybe it won't be. I'd love to, I think, know if you had to do a top three. I know I hate doing like top five, top 10, but if you had to do a top three things that you would like to see change in the birthing realm,
Mm.
um, so that we're able to honor and serve our birthing people. There are
Mm.
so many things, but if you had
Mhm.
to choose three things,
Mhm.
what would they be? What would you like to see change?
Mm. Well, it's funny because I was just talking with a state legislator in New Hampshire yesterday about this. Like, what are my dreams for
Yeah.
our world? It kind of makes me actually feel a little, wow, it touches like a soft spot, of just like, oh, what's our dream? What's
Mm.
our collective dream? And like, what do we wish for families so that things could be better? Um, and so I'm going to answer, I think, for maybe in ways that people wouldn't expect, because it's not so much about actually quality improvement as it is about just being kind humans.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the first is, like, if every family in every community could be welcomed into their parenting experience with, like we talked about, with that really supportive net and network. And I'm talking like they have people coming to their home to tend to them and take care of them and make meals and bring meals, and someone to listen to them for their story and help them with lactation, and that people don't have to work so hard to get that. It's just what our culture and our society does,
Yeah.
So I wish that for every family, that they already have what they need, upon, birth and the initiation of parenting, that they have those needs at the ready. And I would say the second thing is for every single birth professional to have the opportunity to share a difficult birth experience that they've actually participated in professionally. We haven't talked about that today, but I think that when birth professionals have their own network of support but especially like healing experiences, they will then in turn take better care of the people that they're caring for. And so much of what we're dealing with right now, even though, yes, again, like we need to understand, health equity and systemic racism and, postpartum hemorrhage and, all these things, like 100%. But when it gets down to it, it's about each individual relationship, human to human. And when someone is aware of their own wounds and their own stuff that's preventing them from being curious, from being kind, from being compassionate, from being self-aware, that's causing them to be judgmental. And, the things that really mess healthcare up, honestly.
Yeah.
When people get that, then they can deliver better quality healthcare, like in general, like they're going to do better for families, for individuals. So I think that everyone needs to have, that every hospital, every whatever, like we all need to have somebody to listen to hear our stories. And so, and then I guess the third is, that just like what you said, one way or another, that everyone has an opportunity to have their birth story heard in a way that is loving and curious and tender and, really held deeply, because it's a sacred story.
Yes.
It's a rite of passage, and it deserves its own listening ceremony,
Yeah.
I mean, the miracle, like that a human being comes into the world, like that should be so revered. Like that should be such a treasured ceremonial experience, and someone's story is so sacred, and our culture has just like, we've forgotten that completely.
Yes.
So those are my three things, mostly it's about love.
I was going to say, like, the overarching theme, I feel like, is empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
For everyone, for the birther, for the birth worker, for everyone. Like, this is just such, just empathy and compassion in general. We need that.
We do. And this is one way to do that, listening.
Yeah.
Your podcast.
Just listen. Oh, well, I hope so. I hope that this can help. That's the whole goal, and is to have someone hear it and not feel alone, or to have someone tell their story and feel loved and feel seen. So,
beautiful.
I want to thank you for the experience of our time together with Birth Story Medicine. I hope I thanked you then, but if not, I'm doing it now because it did shift a lot of things for me. And I'm thanking you sort of on a bigger scale for the work that you're doing with individuals and with organizations like VCHIP and at the state and local level, just to help create a more compassionate environment for our birthing people and our children. And thank you for taking the time to chat with me today on a Saturday.
On a snowy Saturday that we're having.
On a snowy Saturday. But yes,
you're so welcome, Chelsea.
Much.
This was really valuable, and it's always so nice as well, just to reflect on the work. Sometimes we're so in it. It's like, at least for me, I sometimes forget, like, oh, okay, yeah, that's good work.
Yes.
Keep going. Keep going.
Yes.
Going.
Keep going.
It's just like a mama. Keep going. One day at a time.
Farrah, thank you so much for connecting with me, for our time together through Birth Story Medicine, and for the work that you're doing to create a safe and compassionate world for birthing people. I'm excited to see where your journey takes you. Listeners, please check the show notes to learn more about Farrah, Birth Story Medicine, and the work that VCHIP is doing in Vermont. You can keep up with us on Quiet Connection by following us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at Quiet Connection Podcast. You can help our community grow by leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and consider sharing our episodes on social media. To share your personal journey, you can contact us through our website at www.quietconnectionpodcast.com or by email at quietconnectionppmh@gmail.com. Join us next time when another story is told and you realize you are not alone. I see you.